Hello and welcome to the Let's Examine Addiction Honestly podcast. My name is Charles. This is essentially a podcast where I go over addiction, my relationship to it, because I do have a lot of addictions, honestly, between technology, drinking, smoking, all of it. Unfortunately, whatever is in my biology is just loves addiction, honestly. So kind of want to go over it. This is going to be the 6th episode. And even though no one's listened yet, I think I'm going to keep going with it, even just to make like kind of a audio diary journal about everything I've experienced and just kind of going over different things to see, it may help somebody in the future. And I'd love for that to happen, honestly. I just know for a lot of like my adult life, drinking and being alone, honestly, I felt alone. The whole being alone and feeling alone just went hand in hand. Like I pushed people away, and if I wasn't drinking with them, honestly, there's so much to go over. So that's what this podcast is about. And as always, please understand that I am not a trained professional and do not use this podcast as an alternative to proven medical methods such as AA, NA, therapy, rehab, etc. I'm not an expert. I'm just a moron who's gone through this stuff and kind of want to go over it. Today's episode is going to be about, the history of alcohol, crime, and punishment. Just going over a little bit of a history. I wanted to look into it. I've drank since I was 17. So for over 18 years, I've been an alcoholic, and honestly, it's been an alcoholic. Recently, due to some changes, I don't drink quite as much, and I'll go over them eventually. And like how I kind of used psychedelics over in Ann Arbor to kind of facilitate helping me with that, but that's not even a thing I'd suggest for everybody. But eventually, I do want to go over it. So essentially, let's get into it. Alcohol has like super long origins, honestly. I can remember learning about it in school, especially in college. I learned about a few different things, especially when I think I took like an Islam class. I think we ended up learning about its creation, and just knowing it has like ancient origins and was like discovered by accident for the most part is what a lot of people believe. There's just like numerous sources that say it was discovered when a bunch of different ingredients were left in a bowl and it ended up fermenting into alcohol, which honestly, if it was created that way, thinking why somebody would have actually wanted to consume this random concoction. Maybe it was a scarcity of like resources, but I don't know why somebody would taste something that they didn't know what it was. But a lot of the sources I found point back to as early as 100,000 years ago. And like some of the first concrete evidence I could find pointed at around 11,000 BC with the burial site in Israel where they had found potentially some alcohol remnants or pottery related to it for a burial. And there was evidence of like beer in China around 7,000 BC, wine in Georgia, the country, not the state, around 6,000 BC, Iran, Egypt, Mesopotamia. They all had like forms of alcohol that they used for different things. And some of these concoctions were actually more like a thick gruel, similar to like porridge or oatmeal that just had alcohol in them, which sounds so unappealing, but was often like nutritious, and they kind of knew it was safe due to the alcohol killing like the bacteria and stuff. I guess they probably didn't know it was safe. It may have just been from storage, honestly. It's one of those things where there, especially in the modern world with Google, every resource I went to had pretty much something different. It didn't matter if I went to like a scholar article or went to like a college's website. Everything seemed to have some different information. So please understand that if you're like, that's not right, I'm an expert, well, please come in and talk to me and the rest of us and let us know. Just know this is a general overview. I never meant this to be an actual informative podcast in this sense. I just wanted to go over the history of alcohol. I wanted to look it up because I didn't know a whole lot about it. I've done it for a few college classes, but with having drank for so long, I wanted to look it up, honestly. And from what I could tell, a lot of these alcohols varied in alcohol content, but a lot of them seem to not be as strong until we got to like liquor, which we'll go over here in a bit. And alcohol was used for a lot of different tasks such as religion, ceremonies, medicinal and medical treatment, trade, burial ceremonies, and were used by a lot of different civilizations such as the Sumerians, Egyptians, Greeks, Roman, Chinese, even the Native Americans. And they all had different forms of like alcohol that they got to ferment. But as I stated earlier, Like the alcohol content didn't really increase until distilled liquor, which actually began to be perfected around like the 1400s from what I could find in Europe. But there even was evidence of possible earlier distillation. And one of the really interesting facts that I found was, while I know about like boiling distillation, where you kind of use like the vapors and, you know, like a moonshine still and all those different things, there is actually something called freezing distillation, where you freeze the alcoholic liquid and you actually take the ice that is in there and remove it, because that's all water. So you're essentially removing all the water from this concoction and actually increasing the alcohol that's in there, which absolutely blew my mind because I knew about boiling. And I swear this is true and not like one of my drunken memories. I actually bought a bottle of Jack Daniels from the Army PX when I was in the military, and it actually froze when I put it in the freezer and became a slushy. So I wonder if that was like a bad bottle or something. But I had never known about the freezing distillation, which was pretty interesting, honestly, to find out about. And from everything I could find, that this really changed alcohol and became very dangerous, as it lasts a lot longer than most other alcohols, with the potential to reach a higher alcohol content. You can think of like alcohol poisoning, everything like that. And while it fueled the ability to turn crops into a transportable commodity, it also allowed for cheap and potent alcohol, which during like the 18th century, and I guess really before, it just led to a wider availability of alcohol to like lower classes at a cheaper price, essentially allowing them to fuel alcoholism. Because if you are a farmer or a factory worker who doesn't have a lot of money and you can get this cheap liquor, it's just, I mean, honestly, as being like lower middle class, the availability of having like a cheap liquor just does not equate to anything good. And at some points, alcohol such as like gin were readily available and cheaper compared to other drinks. Even sometimes it was more available in like water and everything. I know like medically rum was available to keep sailors drinking water and lime juice. So it was used for a whole lot of different things. I know they say it was used for like to prevent scurvy and everything. It was also used as like a disinfectant, anesthesia. I know like during the Prohibition, I listened to the Time Suck podcast, which is a really good one, where he talked about the Great Molasses Flood, and they were during the Prohibition alcohol, they were trying to bring all the molasses in to make alcohol. Sorry about the tangent, but I was just thinking about all the different uses. Like during that point, they were trying to make it for medical and other uses outside of consumption, and trying to get it to all the speakeasies. Well, not really speakeasies because it was before, but his podcast does it a lot better. Go and listen to it. All of his episodes are far better than mine, honestly. But back on my tangent of the history of alcohol, I found a few different things where some people would say that it was safer than water at some points due to the quality not being trusted. There were articles and different things where people were like, I'm an expert. It wasn't. I don't know. But if you think about it, like bottling that liquor would actually keep like bacteria out, as to if you take a bottle of water out of the lake, you're most likely going to grow some form of bacteria or potentially illness in that bottle. So if you take like liquor and transport it, it is safer than water. Like no matter where you go, if I were to go down to the lake and I had a bottle of vodka in my hand, or I had lake water, which one do you think is safer to drink? So while everything I could find was like really split on that, honestly, it would make sense logically to me that alcohol at certain times would be safer. I mean, even on the ships, if you think about the rum and everything for sailors, you can't drink salt water because it's got salt in it. So rum would technically be safer than water. So it makes sense that it could have been used for avoiding the threat of bacteria in water. Once they found out about that, there were different times where people didn't know bacteria existed, or you could get sick from dirty waters. Especially, I know in like England, for the longest time, they didn't know that, discharging your bacteria or your like sewage into your river and then taking that water to give to people was bad, which sounds so gross, but I've listened to that on Time Suck as well. If I bring that podcast a lot, it is because that is one that I listened to, that he helped me. He was actually the one who got me to even consider psychedelics and, kept me going after my DUI. So, and the DUI will be a different episode later on down the line. And he does podcasts like this, but with way more evidence and stuff. This one, I did a lot of research and compared different resources. resources. But just know that I don't want this to be an informational one. I want it to be more of a community of addiction and like talking about like how we get through it. Like, how do I get day to day of not smoking? How do I try to take steps to stop drinking? How do I do different things? I just wanted to go over alcohol and what I could find because I did find it interesting and wanted to know about the different things. So please know that if you're like this, that's not true. I tried. I spent nights upon nights looking at different resources. I just found this interesting. So back on topic, even with alcohol's rising popularity, there were some religions such as Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism that avoid alcohol use. This is for a bunch of different reasons. There are some other religions such as Christianity that shun usage to some point, but don't outright restrict it. I know Mormons, actually that's one that I forgot for the other list, avoid things like alcohol. So there are some that have banned it, and I wonder if that's because they saw the effects of usage of it and what it did to different people. So it'd be intriguing to know exactly why that came about and all them different religions took those stances. So if you know and you have experience in that, please reach out. I'd love to hear. But being an American, I know that alcohol was heavily intertwined in early America. Colonists would drink it sometimes from sunrise to sunset, having different alcohols at different times during the day. But even at this point, drunkenness was seen as being a sign of a weak person instead of an alcohol issue. Which honestly, as hard as it is for me to say, being an alcoholic, I do kind of agree with. There are, especially with my DUI, I have so many regrets about it. But there are so many things I could have done. I had a person in my life at the time who supported everything I did. She had my back at all times, and I just treated her like garbage, and I chose alcohol over her every time. And I don't think alcohol in itself is bad. I have friends who can, have a shot just to taste like a new liquor and not drink to get drunk. And that's another reason why I wanted to start this podcast, is to know, to kind of understand why other people like drink. Like, why do you do it? Why do you feel that? Why do you want to feel that way? I mean, I know for a lot of the time I hate being social, and then like alcohol brings out my social side, and it also brings out my super stupid side. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, and it just makes me absolutely into a moron. And I want to understand that, or at the very least, let know somebody else they're not alone, and know that you might have made a mistake, but I made a mistake too, so you're at least not alone. And with this, the 18th Amendment, like I was talking about earlier, was enforced in 1920. This meant the production, transportation, and sale of alcohol was illegal outside of, I think there was like medicinal purposes, but even then, a lot of the time they tried to make it so it wasn't able to be consumed with different like poisons and stuff like that. It was meant strictly for medicinal purposes. But much of the public believes that the amendment failed to obtain its goals. I mean, if you think about it, all it did was increase crime, separate the country. There was evidence that the mortality rates due to alcohol consumption were higher during this dry period, especially if you're going from not drinking to drinking heavily. I mean, when I got my DUI, the day after I was off probation, I drank so heavily that I don't know how I didn't get alcohol poisoning, but I've seen people try to drink different ways. I know in the prisons, they would try to take hand sanitizer, and there's a certain way you can do it where you could potentially remove the alcohol from the toxic stuff. I don't know if it's true or not, but if it's not, you run that risk of like alcohol poisoning or other issues. And like I said earlier, the government during this period wanted to make this industrial alcohol unusable to be consumed and for bootleggers to take, so they'd make batches. Well, the bootleggers would make batches that were questionable quality. So, I mean, if you think about it, moonshine, if you don't do it right, there's always the thing about going blind. You can get different additives in there. I mean, look at the fentanyl crisis now. You put one wrong thing into something and you can take somebody's life from it. So it's one of those things where you don't know who you're getting something from. And if it's illegal, you are just running that super risk of it not ending well, honestly. And so this ended up with the repeal for it being ineffective, the rise of organized crime, and honestly, the need for tax revenue and a lot of resources due to the Great Depression. Between the need for tax revenue and it being a Great Depression and people needing to drink, honestly makes sense, as you're going to want to keep the general public kind of, I guess, subdued, honestly. If they're drinking, they're not as mad at you. I mean, if you have a completely sober populace, there's a chance of, people getting upset that there's a depression. And all this actually honestly was crazy to think about in comparison to nowadays. Here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, there's a lot of like microbreweries, distilleries. I mean, you can buy home brewing kits. You can buy these little kits where it's a little like barrel and you buy the actual additives from the company and you can make the brew at home yourself, which is, I never would have thought about that as a kid growing up in the 90s. That is just absolutely bonkers to me, thinking about being able to make your own stuff at home that's not moonshine. So just seeing how the world has changed, and we'll go over that, especially with like crime and everything and like DUIs, but just the absolute change in the world and how everything is done is surprising, but also just kind of interesting to me. And that's all stuff we can go over. If anybody wants like an episode on it, please reach out. I mean, if you say you have another addiction, say you don't have any addiction, you just want to talk about home brewing, I mean, you can come on. I don't mind chatting with somebody from a different way of life. I couldn't do home brewing. I'm an alcoholic for one, and I'm always worried that I'll mess something up. So please reach out. I'd love to hear from you, even if you don't come on to an episode. I can always share your story or look into it. Because while this is an addiction podcast, I mean, we're all addictions. So, I mean, if you're an addict for one thing and maybe home brewing's your one little getaway and you don't drink it at all or you drink minimally and you want to talk about how proud you are of yourself for that, do it. Because I'm an alcoholic and there were times during my life where I couldn't avoid alcohol like ever. Like anytime I got to drink, I would. But if you can drink it like a responsible adult, I'm proud of you more than words could ever say. And I want to hear about everything you have to talk about. So please always feel free to reach out with that stuff. In the second part of this podcast is going to be about alcohol and crime, which I found I looked at numerous resources again. It looks like in the 16th century was the first time really the English mentioned public drunkenness as a crime. And with that, like my main focus is kind of like DUIs because that's what I have an experience in. I've gotten drunk and done dumb stuff, but never really, like I've never fought anybody. I've never been that type of drunk. It's mostly, it was that one DUI with me, and then most of the rest is just making a clown of myself. And so DUIs first became a crime in 1906 in New Jersey and 1910 in New York from what I could find. But even then, a lot of these laws still left punishment up to the discretion of the states. The 1930s, a drunkometer was actually produced, which was a balloon-like device that measured alcohol in the breath. And 1953, one of the first breathalyzers was produced, which was a more accurate and portable breath testing device. Depending on what state you lived in, drunk driving in many states was allowed, even up until the 1980s, which we'll go over here in a bit why that changed. But I know from having a family full of alcoholics, my grandparents mentioned like cops would drive or follow you home if you were drunk and pulled over for drunk driving. So it wasn't like sometimes they didn't even bat an eye. And you hear all these stories about police being pulled over and like being on camera nowadays, but like in the past, the police would just follow you home. It wasn't even an issue, which again, I'll explain later, like why it changed and why it needed to. This was a bad principle because you're not changing anything during that. If you're just giving them like a slap on the wrist, it's not going to change the underlying issue. But from my DUI, I can tell you, I don't think anything's changing. I hated what I went through for my DUI, not because I found it an inconvenience. I didn't find it effective. That's my biggest issue with the whole thing, is it felt more like a cash grab than trying to help me as a person. But we'll move on. I did find a whole lot of information, and I didn't want this to be an informational podcast, so I grabbed like the 5 top statistics I found interesting and related to alcohol and like my life. This comes from the National Council of Alcoholism and Drug Dependence. Alcohol and drugs are implicated in an estimated 80% of offenses leading to incarceration in the United States, such as domestic violence, driving while intoxicated, property offenses, drug offenses, and public order offenses. Alcohol is a factor in 40% of all violent crimes. There are 3 different types of really crime. User-related crime. These are crimes that result from or involve individuals who ingest drugs and who commit crimes as a result of the effect of the drugs has on their thought processes and behavior. Economic-related crimes. These are crimes where the individual commits a crime in order to fuel a drug habit. These include theft and prostitution, essentially. System-related crime. These are crimes that result from the structure of the drug system. They involve production, manufacturing, transportation, sale, as well as violence related to the production or sale of drugs, such as a turf war. That one was really interesting to me, honestly. Number 4, more than 1 million people are arrested annually for driving while intoxicated, which is the third most commonly reported crime in the United States. Drinking and drugged driving is the number 1 cause of death, injury, and disability of young people under the age of 21, and nearly 40% of all traffic fatalities are alcohol related. Each year, more than 600,000 students between the ages of 18 and 24 are assaulted by another student who has been drinking. 95% of all, well, I guess this one's kind of like a 3-parter. It was based on college. 95% of all violent crime on college campuses involves the use of alcohol by the assailant, victim, or both. And 90% of acquaintance sexual assault or rape on college campuses involves the use of alcohol by the assailant, victim, or both, which is a super sad statistic, honestly. So how have DUIs changed in the country? DUI punishments have become significantly harsher, more standardized, and comprehensive over time, driven largely by an increased public awareness and advocacy groups like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which I want to do an episode about them. I believe what they have done is like necessary. I mean, even when I was going through AA, I was talking to the person that was my sponsor, and he was talking about how he went to court and got slapped with a super harsh fine because MAD was there. And he said the guy behind him was dealing, or in front of him was dealing coke to kids, but because there was no like Mothers Against Drug sales, that he got hit harder, which is like a whole, obviously MAD isn't about that. MAD is about the reason they were created, which I'll go over in just a moment. But that's what has always made me think of MAD, and I think their whole purpose is essential, especially with how many people you think have multiple DUIs. I've only gotten one. I got one, and I'll go over it in my episode. I had gone to a local like mental health facility, and they put me on these like drugs to quit drinking. I was supposed to take them. The first day I took them, I went over to another city to attend my friend's birthday party, and this is not an excuse. I blacked out while drinking, got behind the wheel, but guess what? I don't drink that heavily. I never get behind the wheel. I tend to place my keys somewhere where I'll forget them while I'm drinking. I have not gotten behind the wheel while drinking since then. So I believe what they are doing is essential and extremely important, and I'd love to learn more about them. Unfortunately, I don't know as much as I would like, so I would definitely love to do an episode about them as well. And I mean, there have been a lot of changes in the DUI and DWI laws and penalties over the years. I mean, a lot of it comes to especially the BAC, the blood alcohol content limits. In like the early to mid 20th century, laws were vague. There was no standardized BAC. Limits varied widely, sometimes as high as 0.15%, which is pretty tipsy if you think about it, and went based solely off like physical signs of intoxication instead of like actual intoxication. So a lifetime alcoholic who could have like a 0.4 and still like walk a straight line wouldn't show it as much as somebody who, you know, drank once a year and had a glass of wine. And then from what I found in 1980, Candy Lightner founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving after her 13-year-old daughter was killed on her way home from school by a drunk driver. The biggest issue being that the drunk driver had 3 previous DUIs and was out on bail from a hit-and-run arrest 2 days earlier, which even in 2025 is shocking to me, that in even the 80s that he was out after 2 days for a hit-and-run and had 3 DUIs and was still driving around. So I don't fault laws at all in all the chaos I went through for my DUI. I have no understanding of how this even happened, that he had 3 DUIs and a hit and run and was out. I don't even know how I would live with myself getting a second one if I made that stupid decision. I would rather sleep in my car and freeze, honestly, than try to drive home if I had more than like a drink. But with the creation of Mothers Against Drunk Driving and Students Against Drunk Driving, they began to lobby Congress for tougher legislation for those convicted of DUIs and DWIs, which is honestly understandable. There's no way it should have gotten to that point in the first place. And in 2000, President Clinton passed a transportation appropriations bill, which required states to lower their permissible blood alcohol content to 0.08 by October of 2023, or they'd lose federal highway funding for construction. And the government concluded that lowering the permissible limit from 0.1 to 0.08 actually reduced alcohol-related fatalities by 7%, translating to about 500 lives per year, which doesn't, seem like a lot. But if you think about essentially 22 years since that point at 500, that's 11,000 people, which even bringing it down just a little bit is a huge success, especially because it doesn't seem like that much of a difference, but just the 0.02 change in alcohol absolutely changes the way you drive. Having any alcohol in your system at all. I know back when I was trying to quit smoking and would go months without smoking or like dipping or anything, and like having that like dip or smoke after that amount of time, just the head rush and the different feeling that I would feel changed everything. So if you go from your normal self to having a blood alcohol content of 0.08, and that means that 8% of your blood is alcohol, you change your movement and stuff so much. You can start feeling like an out-of-body experience. I know if I go like a while without drinking and then have, say like a glass of wine, my entire body feels completely different. And then you translate that into moving a couple like hundred to thousands pounds of a vehicle, you are going to do damage, and it's going to be irreversible, honestly. And then by October 1st, essentially, in 2003, 45 states had passed the 0.08 BAC laws, with around July of 2004, all 50 states passing that lower blood alcohol content limits. And for a lot of the states, anyone under 21 and commercial drivers, their BAC limits are even lower, generally like 0. There's little limits for somebody who has a commercial driver. If you're driving a semi, you shouldn't be having a drink anyways. And if you're going to have a drink, I can see drinking, but if you're going to have a drink and you got 8 hours off and want to have a few drinks, just make sure you're parked and you're up for the night. There's no reason to get behind like a semi with an entire load and trying to move all that stuff around. You're just asking for trouble at that point. So with these lower limits and everything, there was an increase in severity of penalties. Like I said, in the early and mid 20th century, penalties were lenient. They involved fines, maybe spending a night in jail until sober, getting followed home, very few serious long-term consequences. But now, today, they are way more severe. It's mandatory jail time with stricter mandatory minimum sentences. There are hefty fines and fees. I know when I got mine, I think I had to pay $2,000 in driver responsibility fees. There's mandatory license suspension revocation. My license was suspended for a year, where I had to ride with a friend to work, and I worked 45 minutes away, so that was insane, trying to juggle all that around. The ignition interlock devices, which are the breathalyzers, you have to pay for those, pay to have them installed. They often kind of mess up. You'll be driving down the road and have to blow into them. Alcohol education and treatment. I think I had to take an 8-session class. It was a couple $100 for alcohol treatment, which I will go over that. I liked that in itself. I think that was probably the only helpful part of my DUI, but even then, the instructor was great, but the facility was something else. And most of the people were there just because they had to be. There are a lot of places where you get felony charges, and a DUI can be elevated for felony charges under certain circumstances, such as a crash with injury, high BAC, presence of a minor. I know if you have a concealed carry permit for a pistol and you have the pistol on you, that's a felony. I had it when I worked at the prison, which I'll go over the whole prison, corrections officer setting, and how the different officers I noticed dealt with their different, the stress of the job, everything like that, family problems from the constant overtime and just that whole setting. And I can't think of the word right now, but a lot of officers drank. I lost a few friends to, self-harm or alcohol-related incidents, so I'll go over those just because there's so much to go over. I noticed a lot of alcoholism, and some of that a lot of that fueled mine. I was working second shift, and so it was easy to drink after work. Is it right? No, but I will go over everything. I plan to use this as more of a journal since nobody's listening, and hopefully at some point in the future it'll help somebody. I'd love for it to help, anybody know that they're not alone and that you can change. And finally, there's been an increase in enforcement and public awareness. There's a lot of prioritizing DUI enforcement through methods like field sobriety tests, breathalyzers. Some states have sobriety checkpoints. I don't think Michigan does. I'll have to look into that, which were far less common in earlier, like in years ago, even like the 80s when this awareness and push first started. And then efforts like organizations like MAD have significantly changed public perception, which it should. It should shift drunk driving away from being a minor infraction to a serious crime because, I mean, I only had one, but there are so many people that I know that have had, 2, 3, 4 that just get behind the wheel after having a drink. Honestly, if I can't get home or can't stay somewhere or can't figure something out, I don't have a drink. And I understand it's not like that for some people. Addiction is such a crazy beast, and that's why I want to learn about it and hear other people's stories, but it's something that's got to change. No one should lose their 13-year-old child over somebody who can't stop drinking. For my DUI, if I would have injured somebody or resulted in their death, it would have been all over for me. I never would have been able to live with myself, to be honest. The thought of getting behind a wheel, if I have like a glass of wine or anything nowadays, just absolutely scares me. And that's why eventually I hope to get to not drinking anymore because there's no reason for it. I have shown that I'm not a completely responsible person and that I have so much trauma behind me that it's probably for the best that I quit. But I also want to do it healthily. I don't want to go through the mental health place nearby that wants to push pills off on me again. I want to do it healthily, like I did with smoking. It took me a while to quit smoking, but I did it, and I haven't looked back. I haven't had any relapses in over a year now. I have my cravings every now and again, but I push them to the side, and that's what I want to do with drinking. I don't want to slap another pill on my docket that I have to remember, that I have to hope works, that I don't drink and don't black out and don't do this. I don't want to have that happen. I get that it may work for some people. I just don't want to go down that road again. I don't want to risk it. And thankfully, after like some of the things I've tried, my drinking is way down. And like there's points where I don't even drink on the weekends sometimes. And I can push past that where I'll have like one drink and go to bed. I want to make it like 0. But that's kind of what this podcast is about, is just trying to figure stuff out. Figure out why I want to drink in the first place. Why I want to sit alone at my computer and drink and play video games. That doesn't make sense to me. If I'm not like hanging out with somebody, what's the point of drinking and not being social? So as always, I want to thank you so much for listening to my rambling. If you're here, I know nobody's listened to one yet. I think there was like one listen on my first video on YouTube so far, but if you made it here somehow, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe. You can email letsexamineaddictionhonestly@gmail.com or theleahpodcast@gmail.com with any feedback, ideas, or stories. And as Alan Watts said, you are under no obligation to be the same person you were 5 minutes ago. So even if you drank last night and you woke up with a hangover, it doesn't mean you have to drink tonight. It doesn't mean you have to smoke tonight. It doesn't mean you have to do anything. Just know that even if you only make it day to day sober and you make it 2 days and then relapse, just know I'm proud of you for that time you took fighting it off, and that I'm here to listen to your story and not to gain anything from it. I'm not making this podcast to make a ton of money. I'm obviously not making any money right now with no one listening to it, so that's not the point. If I ever do make money off it, it'll be just to reach more people and try to help people through addiction. Just know that you are loved, you matter. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.